cleaning your part on your first date?
Yes.
Man, what a woman.
Well, I had a hard time explaining to her. She wouldn't talk to me for about a month after this episode. So she came up to the house, and I was running late, you know, as I typically was. And I was back in the shower, and she was going to do one of these water tricks to me, you know. And she pulls open the shower, and I'm standing back there with a cylinder head in my hands underneath the shower. Okay? Well, how do you explain to a woman that you're washing your cylinder head off, you know, in the garage or in the shower, you know?
Saving water.
Right. Didn't quite understand that, so I kind of was known as cylinder head for a while around the house. What you got to be careful of on a filter too is if you guys get Speedway magazine, you read some of the, and those of you that race like John, get a filter cutter, and all it is like a big can cutter, and that's how I cut these apart. Okay? You can't do this with a hacksaw. You're going to fill it with debris on the inside. Get a filter cutter. It costs 30, 40, 50 bucks, and they're worth the investment. You really want to, I really don't like that System 1 take-apart filter. It really has got too much restriction and internal resistance in it. I've run it before, and it filters down very, very small, and I just don't think that the oil goes through it as well as it should. I still go back to one of these, and I got a filter cutter, and I cut it apart, and I just pull this thing out, and the first thing I do is I just look for solids down in the bottom, you know, of this. And then I look for debris, you know, how much sparkle do I see between the paper medium. And it will tell you if you're buying a, say the filter again, a Deutsch or a Wix, okay? A Hastings. What I found in some of the Hastings filters is they come in a container size like this, and there's a nice big 2-inch paper slug or a cardboard slug or a plastic slug sitting on the bottom, and you've got a filter that's only that thick. They use a universal media that go into all different sizes of cans. That's a little fraud again, guys, okay? And that lets you catch some of these scams, and that's what I see in some of the Hastings and some of the Wix. Okay? Not saying that the filter that they supply to you, they have a full paper media for that size can. Some of the Ford Motor Company filters were the durated filters that they said, you know, when they first came out, were made out of chopped up rags. And we took some of the filters apart, and I found a Penny's bra in there. It was all chopped up, but it had a Penny's label on it. It says Penny's bra, and it was like a 39D or whatever it was. You know? Wow. You know, I mean, but it was all chopped up inside that filter, and that was filtering oil. And then I got another one that had cotton remnants. And when they went out to the cotton gin, I guess they just went and scooped everything up with a shovel, and we even found a couple rocks down in there, you know, mixed in with the cotton. So, you know, there's scam artists even in this stuff. So, you know, the only way you're going to know is go buy you a $50 filter cutter and do your own qualitative analysis of what your own eyes tell you. You're going to see some sparkles down in there, but if, boy, you see a lot of debris down in there, it's a whole lot easier to stop that engine now than let her go and shell herself apart. And go back and put bearings in it versus a crank and whatever. Okay, Roddy will tell you that. He just did one, and he took too far.
Has a canister, and once you roll it,
you know where toilet paper belongs? Over there in the men's room, okay? Toilet paper does not belong in the filter media of a car because of its cotton and paper base. What did we just say was the big problem with this particular filter right here? Was it's cardboard, and it dissolves, and the paper filaments will dissolve, go through the engine, and it could possibly get underneath the pressure relief valve and create problems. Now, if I got toilet paper in there, okay, look at that stuff after it's been down in there. You know, you guys go out to the fairs, and you know, you're out there in a little plastic building, and you look down in it, you know, I wouldn't want that in my motor. I don't like that.
actually, I try not to look down there.
I know.
It goes down your nose and...
All right, let's talk about engine blocks first.
I have a question on the filters.
Yes.
Is there an extra capacity filter up there on the Chrysler?
Yes, anything that's a Ford filter and the old Chrysler 318 filters are all the same. But that's what those are right there. Don't use that little bitty Chrysler filter, that 409 part number. Everything in my brain is last 3 part numbers, okay? When I talk to you guys today, I want to talk 287, 782, 445 heads, okay? Take that as the last 3 part numbers of what I'm telling you. That 409 oil filter, that 409 oil filter, that little bitty teacup guy. Don't run that thing. Go get yourself the 318 oil filter, and if you got room in front of your radiator fan, You might even notch out the radiator fan shroud a little bit and let it go up into the radiator. Hey, you more capacity, that filter is going to filter more debris out of the motor.
You're referring to the tall
Yeah.
318 or the short 318 filter?
Well, there's two of them. Okay?
Right, 'cause
This
the
happens to be the nice
shorter.
tall boy, and there's a shorter one of this variety too. This
Right.
is the PF8 or the 3001.
So internally, they wouldn't create any problems as far as the filter.
If you can run that filter, now what have we got here? Not only do we have more paper media to cover more filtration time frame, we can also carry another pint of oil. See what I'm saying? Particularly if you've got one of these oil pans over here that are basically only 4.5 quarts. Why did Chrysler go to a 4.5 quart system over the 5 quart? Like 7 cents. 7 cents over 1 million cars. I'm paying my pension right now. That's what it is.
Your fault.
Basically, that's what it amounts to. The design engineers found that 4.5 quarts or a 4 quart system was just as adequate as a 5, and we could save a quart of oil, and that converts to about what we buy in base stock was about 7 cents. We buy oil in bulk, that's about what we pay for it. About 7 cents a quart. 7 cents times 3.5 million cars.
Why not just send the cars
Stockholders
out
are
1
happy.
quart low?
Pardon?
Why not
Just
send
ask for the
the
dipstick.
cars out 1 quart low and just say, and it's marked a dipstick?
Because that guy doesn't change his look.
I mean, that's
You're thinking
cheaper.
logical, okay?
No, I guess the dealer got it, he would check it, as though it's quart low, they put a
No,
quart in
you-
it,
you don't
and
have
that's
to
on a new
fix it.
car prep, and it gets charged back.
It's
Turn
right
a
back.
warranty for him.
Plus, they saved over a period of time, maybe another penny in the manufacturing of that pan. See, this thing snowballs. Remember I said we were up in the ocean? We gotta go back and we're gonna do product failure analysis, and we're gonna go find the creek, okay? All my bearings went out, but it wasn't my bearings' fault, was it, John? We used oil that had been over fortified with 0.2%.
What if we make an oil pan that'll carry another 2 quarts, like bigger bottle?
If you're in a common block, you can do that. And that's what we're gonna talk about, okay?
I know a guy that does make it for the older one.
1981 to 19, we got a little weirdo that sits in there called a tall block 2.5. That came out in 86, went to 88. Basically, the Chrysler 2.2 was pretty much structurally the same all the way to 1988, including all the turbo 2 motors. Okay? Little change in the oil pan. Little change, remember I said an 85.5 to the oil pump, from a 6-bolt to an 8-bolt crank. 10 millimeter head bolts to 11 millimeter head bolts. That's basically the changes right there. But in 1989, we had problems at Trent Engine Assembly. And you know that wonderful place. If you're never been to Pulse yet. It's such a wonderful place to go to. If you guys know Gary McKissick, okay, Gary. Gary was a powertrain engineer down there at Trenton Engine Assembly Plant. And that place is unbelievable. If you got probably half the grounds of this facility right here, put a building on it, that's about how big this place is, from the foundry to the machining of these cylinder heads. Because we buy those castings from Fiat, to cast that head for us. Well, you guys didn't know that. You heard of Fiat? Well, it's a piece of crap that the Italians ever built. That little F right there tells me this head was casted by Fiat. Okay? Now, there's another head made down in Mexico that's casted down at the Saltillo plant. Okay? Or the Toluca plant.
Which one's got a better,
I like the Mexico head personally. We're going to get off into that later. Okay? Now, in 1989, we knew we had to go and increase the displacement of the motor. We came out in 86 with kind of a weirdo motor, and it was kind of a takeoff of the 2.2, and it was called a tall block 2.5. It had a lot of the additional refinements that we were going to put into the later common block. I mean, what's common block? What the hell are you talking about, Peters? Well, common block is commonality again. Remember we talked about Kenny at the assembly plant wanting commonality, reduced part numbers up there. Well, the same thing that Trent Engine plant wanted. Where did they get that at? Who's got an old rag? Cylinder head I picked up. Okay. Anyway, the Trenton engine plant wanted commonality. They said, you gotta get this 2.5 tall block off our back. Because nothing, you gotta build a whole damn separate line. The cranks didn't interchange. The oil pans didn't interchange. The blocks couldn't go through the same machinery process because they had the same bore, but the deck was 12 millimeters taller. Okay? The connecting rods didn't interchange. The pistons didn't interchange. The only thing that interchanged was the cylinder head. Damn. Multiple part numbers out there. Okay? The tall block 2.5 did some of the things that we wanted it to do. We added 11 pounds of structural cast iron to the block. And most of it was in the bulkhead webbing. It had a pan flange on the back that was straight. If you looked out inside the motors, you could really discernibly see the difference. And a lot of it too was because the block was 12 millimeters taller, and we had good rod angularity in that block. We're going to talk about that in just a minute. What's rod angularity? Okay? But we needed to commonize our part numbers. So, engine powertrain got together with all their design people back about '87, and they said, okay, we're going to look at this thing, and we're going to create a common block. So basically what they did, they created a block that was very similar to the 88. They added 11 pounds of cast iron to it, structurally strengthened this block up to go all the way up to 1993, because that's when it ended, with the IROC 16 valve. And what's the horsepower of that critter? That's the most we've ever made in a 2.2 type engine. Okay? So we needed a block that was structurally strong enough to do it without torsionally twisting. And when they torsionally twist, the first thing they do is start breaking off main caps around number 3. You get over about 2 1/4 on an 88 down block, and you're asking for torsional twist. That's where the block is torsionally twisting on itself, and it can create any kind of failure, from just a random bearing failure to a broken off main cap to whatever, because it's like an old 525 transmission. If you over exceed the horsepower of it, that thing's just going to flat disintegrate. And how in the hell are you going to go back and do a product failure analysis of all the pieces stuck in asphalt? Okay. So we added 11 pounds of main cap and bulkhead webbing. We did better sand castings with it. We made the deck thicker, and we made a block that was exactly the same whether it be a 2.2 or 2.5. The connecting rods now could stay the same. The only thing we needed different was different pistons, because the piston pin has to go into a different location in the piston. Open those up for me, John. And a different crankshaft, because we came out with a different stroke. The 2.2 uses a 3-inch, 363 thousandths stroke. The 2.5 uses a 4-inch, 90 thousandths stroke. Okay. This is a 2.5 piston. This is a 2.2 piston. If you really look at them, you'll see that this pin is a little bit higher in the piston than the 2.2 pin, to compensate for the different strokes, so that this thing gets the same deck height, the same blocks. So we needed different pistons and a different crank. Now we got the same block that can run down the same assembly line, go through all the same machining processes, except for one additional thing. Just hang on to them for just a minute. That has to be done. When you get into a 2.5 motor, whether it is Japanese or Volvo or Saab or Ford or Chrysler or Hyundai or whoever, you get over 2.3 liters. Okay? The engine creates a second order harmonics. Now, to you, John, how old are you? 48. How old are you? 30. His senses and perceptions that his body senses is probably different than yours. Because when you get older, like myself, I'm proud of 60, okay? And my sense of sight and my sense of hearing has diminished. But my other senses have taken over, where the sight and hearing is kind of diminishing, okay? And people that have come out of Buicks, that drive V8s, that get into our front-wheel drive cars, they want a car that's going to feel and drive like a Buick, so they don't want a 2.2, they want a 2.5. And they get into that car and they feel a sensation. It's not an imbalance now, but that particular engine creates a second order harmonics. And it's an up and down oscillation of that engine in the particular mounts. Okay, we've always had a mount sensation problem in our cars. And that owner says, this thing is imbalanced, it's something wrong. So that's when we came up with the Japanese theory that they used on the 2.6s of the counter-rotating balance shafts that sit down in the pan. They're parasitic. But to make that Buick owner happy, we have to put them in there. We got a weight compromise on the front of the car. They weigh something like 21 pounds. How much horsepower do you think they take off the motor?
10.
Reciprocating? On the rotary.
How much do you think they take off? Close. 12. There's 12 horsepower that those counter-rotating balance shafts take off the motor. Okay? So what we gained in displacement, we've kind of lost a little bit, you know, with the additional weight and the additional parasitic horsepower that they're taking off that motor. Now, they're not going to take that much off at 3,000 RPM, but they probably would at 6. Right? Plus, the engine's got to go through a little more operations of having that passageways drilled to mount those stanchions so all that stuff can sit there. But now, that engine is acceptable to that 60-year-old person who has different sensations than he does. Okay? He probably would never feel it, but John might. Okay? So we lost a potential buyer. That's the problem of a 2.5 inline four-cylinder. You're just jumping that displacement up to 2.3 and over creates that phenomenon. Okay? Now, do the balance shafts, is that a wrong name for them? Yeah, you don't balance shit. Okay?
All they are is counter-rotating.
They don't balance nothing.
Yeah.
All they are is dampeners. You know, they've got sound systems out now where you can run an open exhaust and you can put another sound device back at it and shoot the same sound of what's coming out, and you dampen both of them out and you can be standing there and there's no noise. But the exhaust is running purely straight out of the manifolds.
I like noise.
And one sound device is picking up and duplicating the other sound device and we're negating both energy sources of sound. Okay? That's all this thing does, is it negates that second order harmonics. Okay? So for us as performance guys, what's the old proverb about that? John, what's the proverb?
There's no such thing as magic in a can.
Well, there's another thing too.
I only know
It's
one.
not that I'm going to pay you on Friday, okay? There's no substitute for cubic inches. Okay? Now, if you're going to be a quarter-mile guy and you're going to go out there and you're going to run quarter miles, that's all you're going to do, then you don't want a 2.5. Anybody a mathematician in here? There's somebody that got it.
She just left.
Whenever you go and you work in powertrain engine group, there's a ratio figure that they always talk about. And it's called 1.80. Actually, just leave it at 1.8, okay? And that's a rod ratio. Now, if I'm going to sit down and I'm going to break a bolt loose, and I find resistance, what am I going to go do?
Longer.
Because you're a cheater. And I've created a better leverage factor, right? The same thing holds true to a Chrysler connecting rod. Even though the 2.2 and the 2.5 still use a connecting rod that is 5 inches, 900 thousandths long, okay? Chevrolet uses a 5-inch, 700 thousandths long rod. But how many of you guys ever heard of the long rod theory? Every damn circle track magazine in the world talks about it. What is the purpose of it?
More torque.
Rod angularity.
Yeah.
If I made this rod longer,
More leverage. Better torque.
I decreased the thrust loading of the skirt of the piston on the cylinder wall.
What?
Okay? Think about that for just a minute, okay? If we've got a connecting rod, okay, that is 5.9 inches long, and we've got a stroke that is 3.363, we've got something that comes out with a rod ratio of about that. We make it. We're still in the hole. This is the ideal rod ratio right there. Okay, let's go to a 2.5 for just a minute. If you think this is bad, go to a 2.5. A 2.5 is still 5 inches, 900 thousandths long. But now, we've got 4 inches, 900 thousandths stroke. Okay? Now we've got a rod ratio, even worse. That's why a 2.5 is not going to perform on its maximum upper end like a 2.2 or a 2-liter will do. Okay? For rod ratio. Remember that 1.80. Play with it when you go home tonight, or Sunday or Monday, on the calculator. Okay? Let's look at something a little different. Custom. Okay, custom. This right here is 6 inches, 350 thousandths center to center. That's 450 thousandths longer in the connecting rod beam than this one, almost a ½ inch. Okay? Because we've done nothing more than went to Carrillo. We said, Carrillo, we want some longer rods. Okay? What's a longer rod going to do for us? Number one, we've reduced the rod angularity. But if you think about just pure mathematics for just a minute, and just pure old physics, this piston's going to spend a little bit more time at top dead center in dwell saturation. Okay? So we got a little bit easier fuel fill now. A little bit more dwell time at top dead center. Okay? And with a longer rod, we have no thrust loss on the cylinder wall. With a shorter rod, it's going to be down at this angle like this, and we're trying to push that goddamn piston, and all the friction is taking place on that skirt right there, and we're dissipating energy going back up the cylinder wall. Where we got a longer rod, we're not over so far, we're straighter up, the stroke stays the same. All we do is we increase the length of the rod and move the pin up further in the piston. So we got a custom set of pistons, a custom set of rods. Okay? What do we do when we do something like this? I'm going to show you how to make a real cheap e-motor. Let's just do magic for a minute. And say we got a rod that is 6.2 inches center to center. We're, what, 300 thousandths longer now than a stock Chrysler rod. Stock Chrysler rod is 5.9. Remember this right here. 5. That's what we started with. We're going to jump up 300 thousandths more. 300 thousandths bigger. Okay? We're going to go back into that same stroke. Over the magic formula. Beautiful. Beautiful. Okay? How can we achieve that real cheaply and simply? Remember that old whore engine I told you about, the tall block 2.5? Guess what connecting rods it had? Lightweights, okay? But they just happen to be 6 inches, 200 thousandths long. Okay? There is a cheap way to build you a long rod 2.2 with a hell of a lot of dwell saturation. It just wails like hell. Okay? Now, let's go back to common block. And I just showed you some secrets of rod angularity, you know, but a cheap way to make a long rod 2.2. Common block. Bunches of differences in the common block over the conventional block. The first difference is the front oil seal. This bolts directly on the block. Pan marries off of it right there. On the common block, even though it was used only in '89 in some 2.2s with no silent shafts ever made on it, but when it ever was a 2.5, they had silent shafts. And to drive those silent shafts on the front of the crank, we needed room for the gear and the chain. So we had to redesign the front oil seal retainer. And if you look at this, we extend really the pan flange out almost 2 inches. So it requires a totally different pan. So anybody that's got an '89 CSX, you've already got a common block in it. and you can convert that 2.2 or whatever over to a 2.5. Now, if you want something that's strong on launch and in the mid-range, what's the second proverb, John?
There's no substitute for cubic
This
inches?
substitutes for, right, there's no substitute for cubic inches. Okay? Now, the first 1/8 mile, this thing's gonna be a killer. But if you guys are out there on the street driving your performance cars, you ever run a 1/4 mile on the street? And how many times you go to the drag strip? But if you're gonna run them 5.0 Mustangs, you drill his ass the first 2 blocks, you can wave him goodbye, and he's already got his feelings hurt, going home to kick his doors, you know? He ain't gonna run, you know, a 1/4 mile looking for cops. So take advantage of the plentiful 2.5s that are out there on the street, and when you guys do a build upgrade, jump into a common block motor, okay? Now, you ought to say, oh, I got